60% of the out-of-pocket expenditure of healthcare of a typical Indian family is borne by the families. It's not by the state. It's not by the government. As a result, the most common cause for uh, bankruptcy in Indian families, the number one cause is a health setback or a costly admission of a dear family person in the family. So when we talk about holistic metrics, at the other end of the spectrum, what's happening is most of the Indian healthcare, the corporatized part of the healthcare, is now with foreign entities because private equity money has bought over most of the corporates in the country which were promoter owned initially. This is the state at which we have to look at these metrics. Now, if we ask any executive, health executive or a CEO, when you ask them, the majority of them will say that what is their number one strategic goal? Their strategic goal is actually based on purely on revenue. This is typical of the CEOs which are now mostly non-medical people, and they run their, the hospital work is run based on Excel sheet calculations, etc. So on one end, they have this revenue matrix, which is the most important one for them to run it as a profitable business, probably also to build up their CV to show the numbers. And on the other hand, if we follow a matrix where you have a more comprehensive set of parameters, we call this by 4 pillars. The first is the clinical outcomes. We'll see a little bit in detail a little later. The patient experience is the second pillar. The third is the employees, that is your backbone, the workforce and the culture. The third is the equity, what we do to the society, what we do to the environment, etc. If you build your the outcomes on these 4 pillars, let us see and test the hypothesis whether that would be better than the pure revenue based metrics. Now, it's very difficult to get statistics from India, but globally what we have seen is in the last 20 years, for example, for a family of 4 in US, the healthcare costs have rocketed by almost nearly 200%, that is 188%, whereas their income has gone up by only 84%. And even here there is a caveat. The income inequity in America is so high, the top 1% wealthy people in America, they virtually own more than 45% of the wealth of the country. Therefore, even this is an underestimate. So the real income of the average American is not even gone up that much. But this being on one side, we also see that the net operative profit, the net operative margin profit in any typical acute care hospital in America has actually gone down. It is now -8%, which goes to say that despite the costs increasing so much, most of the hospitals, at least in America on paper, are actually not making a decent profit in order to even sustain their business. Now, when we put all these holistic parameters and then see real life scenarios, let's see a few examples. The first example is that of Cleveland Clinic and another is a G. Singer Health System. These two, by adding other matrices into the framework, like they started a patient first value framework for heart failure patients. In the subsequent year, they could save up to $6 million because there were that many 850 less number of heart failure admissions, because these could be taken care of at home or at the primary care physician because of the metrics or the pathway they created. Similarly, there is also this Mayo Clinic, which we all know as always is almost the first or the second in every year, every matrix by which it is analyzed. Now these people, they did not go with a revenue sharing model for their doctors. They have gone with a salary based structure. Still they attract the topmost talent and they're still ranked as number one in many of the value based performances. There's another hospital system called CMS system, which went totally on an outcome based engagement and safety and patient efficiency cost model. And the reimbursement they have figured out is not based on revenue metrics, but only the quality, and volume is just one part of it. Now, if a hospital in India has to decide that we do not want to go only by revenue-based metrics and we will go by these 4 pillars, how is it possible to do it in a practical way? If the hospitals go for the mandated now NABH for any big hospital, or for some of the corporate hospitals which have been in existence for some time, they've gone a step ahead and gone for the JCI certification. Now, what it does is, we can see here that there is absolutely zero revenue metrics at all in this, in the mix of these things. Now, most of these are centered on patient safety and patient access to care, as well as surgical safety, anesthesia safety. Very important component is facility management and safety. We know that how many hospitals have had, even in the recent past, so many fire incidents. So a major part of the engagement is from facility management and safety aspects. Most important is the quality improvement, which is a continuous basis thing. Now, the NABH, which is a little watered down version of the JCI, is something which has become mandatory. Important to note that accreditation is just a global entry ticket, it is not a differentiator. Every corporate hospital has to have NABH. What is important is the differentiator for a hospital, it is how much they are going beyond the required compliance. Now, Apollo Hospital, for example, in which I happen to work now, was one of the first corporate hospital to create a ACE scoreboard, and publicly it is announced and it is available in as a database to access to any public. Here they track many parameters, including the complication and mortality rates by procedure, surgical outcomes of standardized procedures like CABG, TKR, THR, etc., hospital-acquired infections, which is one of the biggest killers for hospital patients, hospitalized patients. ALOS, which is again very important, has a very important bearing on the hospital economics. Readmission rates, pain management satisfaction rates, etc. More importantly, if you benchmark it against the best in the world, like Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, etc., and publish your scores, then you have that much more credibility. But interestingly, if you can see the graph, Apollo, this is a little few years back, bed occupancy, and the graph shows what is the market share. So Apollo has a 30% market share, but when it comes to NPS or the patient satisfaction score, it lags behind Tata Memorial, Narayana, and even Medanta. So this is something of a surprising statistic to me. But probably it can be explained in hospitals like Tata Memorial, where the patient's payout is very less, and the repeat visits are much more for cancer patients, and etc. Now, these are the four final pillars which I said that one has to build the hospital metrics on. Clinical outcomes and safety is the number one. Here we go by KPIs like mortality and morbidity, complication rates, and the reoperation rates, hospital-acquired infection rates, etc. And of course, the functional quality of life of the patient beyond discharge time. Now, if these are from a physician point of view, there is another set of, the other pillar is that of the patient perseverance. It may not always coincide, because we may claim that we have the best outcomes, and in the same patient there may be having other issues as well. So in the patient domain, the communication, coordination, then the grievance redressal mechanism the hospital has, the health literacy, and the shared decisions, consent, for example, how detailed the consent is taken, etc. Now, all this is possible if the third pillar is working well. And the third pillar is the workforce, or the backbone of the institute. Here, we go by things like the MBI, or Mayback Burnout Index. Now, clinicians, a major problem for the doctors, the consultants, and the staff has been the burnout index. Now, the last is the community services, in which the things like charity, which we saw in the previous speaker, etc., are taken into account. The same can be translated when we come to the neurosurgical domain. Now, things like 30-day operative mortality, preoperative counseling when it comes to the patient domain, patient experience domain. Workforce for us extremely important is to take care of your technicians and nurses, etc. How many hours they have logged, even your DLP residents, etc. The nurse to critical bed ratio, and other things. So revenue is not the fuel, but it is revenue is the fuel, but it is not the destination. There cannot be this four-pillar concept which is not underwritten by this revenue. If the revenue is not sustainable, you cannot attract quality, you cannot be on a financial stable footing, and therefore You cannot sustain a business which is not just necessarily profitable, but at least sustainable. So the revenue first prospect.
Kindly summarize.
Yeah, the last layer. Correct. So the shield is not so much against the revenue; it is against revenue standing alone. So you have to define your own KPIs, key performance indicators, measures 3 or 4 for every pillar, benchmark it externally, not just in the best in the country, but the best in the world. You publish them transparently. You publish it in your website. Therefore, everyone is free to see that statistics, and then you keep relearning, review it quarterly, and then build upon.